Two geniuses of the human mind revealed why you live trapped in a life you didn't choose. When Napoleon Hill and Jung uncovered the truth about our mental prison, their revelations shook everything we knew about freedom. Ancient secrets came to light, and millions of lives were changed forever in ways no one could have predicted. A journey of awakening, transformation, and total liberation. Get ready, because this discovery will revolutionize your existence. Subscribe to the channel, like this video, and comment where you're watching from. You wake up every morning with the same invisible chains around your mind, don't you? They're not made of metal or rope. They're woven from thoughts, beliefs, and patterns so deeply embedded in your consciousness that you mistake them for reality itself. What if I told you that the very prison you're living in was built by your own hands, brick by brick, thought by thought over years of unconscious programming? Napoleon Hill once wrote that, "Whatever the mind can conceive and believe, it can achieve. Yet here you are, conceiving limitations and believing in your own powerlessness." Jung understood that the greatest battles aren't fought on external battlefields. They rage within the depths of your own psyche, where shadows dance with light, where your conscious desires wrestle with unconscious sabotage. Feel that stirring in your chest right now. That subtle unease, that whisper that says, "What if there's more?" That's not anxiety. That's your soul recognizing the truth. You are not living the life you were meant to live. You are not thinking the thoughts you were meant to think. You are not being the person you were meant to be. Why does this matter? Why should you care about some dead psychologist and a long-gone success writer when you have bills to pay, relationships to manage, and 1,000 daily pressures demanding your attention? Because every single limitation you believe about yourself, every barrier you perceive in your path, every reason you give for why you can't, won't, or shouldn't, they all stem from the same source, a mind that has been programmed to accept imprisonment as normal. Look around you. Really look. How many people do you see who are truly free? Not financially free, though that may come, but mentally free, emotionally free, spiritually free. How many people wake up each day with genuine excitement about who they're becoming, rather than dread about what they must endure? How many live from inspiration rather than desperation? The statistics are staggering and sobering. Studies show that the vast majority of people feel trapped in their lives, trapped in jobs they hate, relationships that drain them, habits that destroy them, thoughts that torment them. They live as prisoners in their own existence, and the most tragic part, they don't even realize the door was never locked. You see, Napoleon Hill discovered something revolutionary in his 20-year study of successful individuals. The difference between those who break free and those who remain imprisoned isn't talent, luck, or circumstances. It's something far more fundamental and far more within your control. It's the quality of thought. The successful ones had learned to think differently about their limitations. They had discovered what Jung called the process of individuation, becoming who you truly are beneath the layers of conditioning, expectation, and fear. But here's what most people miss when they read Hill's work or study Jung's theories. Freedom isn't just about achieving external success or understanding psychological concepts. Freedom is about breaking the invisible contract you've signed with mediocrity. It's about refusing to accept that the thoughts thinking themselves in your head are actually yours. It's about recognizing that most of what you believe about yourself and the world was installed in your mind before you were old enough to question it. Think about this. When you were born, you had no concept of limitation. You didn't know what was impossible. You didn't understand failure, rejection, or inadequacy. These ideas were taught to you. They were programmed into your neural pathways through repetition, reinforcement, and social conditioning. Every time someone told you be realistic, every time you were punished for dreaming too big, every time you were rewarded for playing small, another bar was added to your mental prison. And now, years later, you carry this invisible jail with you everywhere. You go. You don't need external circumstances to keep you trapped because you've become your own warden. You police your own thoughts, limit your own possibilities, and sentence yourself to a life of quiet desperation, all while believing this is just how things are. But what if it's not? What if everything you've been told about limitation, about reality, about what's possible for someone like you, is nothing more than inherited fiction? What if the very thoughts that feel so true, so obvious, so undeniably real, are actually just programs running in the background of your consciousness, programs you never chose, never examined, and never questioned? Jung understood that most people live what he called an unconscious life. They react instead of respond. They follow patterns instead of making choices. They live from their conditioning instead of their consciousness. They mistake the voice of their programming for the voice of wisdom, the pull of their patterns for the call of destiny. Hill observed the same phenomenon from a different angle. He noticed that unsuccessful people were imprisoned by what he called negative mental attitudes. Not just pessimism, but deeper structures of thought that made success literally impossible to perceive, let alone achieve. These weren't character, flaws or personality disorders. They were simply mental habits, and habits can be changed. The question isn't whether you're trapped. You are. The question is whether you're ready to escape. The question isn't whether you have limitations. You do. The question is whether those limitations are real or imagined. The question isn't whether change is possible. It is. The question is whether you have the courage to discover who you truly are beneath the layers of who you've been told to be, right? Now, as you read these words, something is shifting in your awareness. You can feel it, can't you? That slight loosening of certainty, that crack in the wall of how things are. That's not coincidence, that's recognition. Your deeper self recognizing truth when it hears it. Your authentic nature stirring beneath the weight of accumulated conditioning. But here's what most people do at this moment. They retreat. They feel the stirring and immediately rush to shut it down with rational explanations, practical concerns, and reasonable doubts. They feel the possibility of freedom and instantly begin building new prisons made of yes but and what if, and people like me don't. Don't do that. Not this time. Instead, let that stirring grow. Let that recognition deepen. Let yourself feel for just a moment what it would be like to live without the constant weight of limitation, pressing down on your possibilities. Let yourself imagine what it would be like to wake up each morning knowing that your thoughts are truly yours, that your choices are truly free, that your future is truly unlimited by anything except the laws of physics and the boundaries of your own imagination. Can you feel it? That lightness, that expansion, that sense of infinite possibility stretching out before you like an ocean of potential waiting to be explored. That's not fantasy. That's a glimpse of your natural state. That's who you are beneath the conditioning. That's what you're fighting to return to. The journey from prison to freedom isn't just about changing your circumstances. It's about changing your relationship with your own mind. It's about learning to distinguish between thoughts that serve you and thoughts that enslave you. It's about discovering the difference between reacting from your conditioning and responding from your consciousness. This isn't positive thinking or wishful fantasy. This is practical psychology applied to the art of living. This is understanding that your mind, like any tool, can be used skillfully or unskillfully, consciously or unconsciously, in service of freedom or in service of imprisonment. And the choice, always and forever, is yours. But first, you have to see the prison. You have to recognize the bars. You have to understand how the lock works before you can turn the key. And that requires something most people are unwilling to do. Look honestly at how they've been living, thinking, and being without judgment, without defense, without the comfortable lies that make slavery feel like safety. Are you ready for that level of honesty? Are you ready to discover how your own mind has been working against you? Are you ready to see the patterns that have been running your life from the shadows? Are you ready to meet the parts of yourself that you've been avoiding, denying, and projecting onto others? Because if you are, if you're truly ready to exchange comfort for truth, familiarity for freedom, and the safety of prison for the adventure of authentic living, then you're about to embark on the most important journey of your life. You're about to discover not just how to think differently, but how to be different. Not just how to achieve more, but how to become more. Not just how to get what you want, but how to become who you truly are. The door has always been unlocked. The question is, will you finally walk through it? Imagine a world where every limitation you've accepted about yourself dissolved overnight. Imagine waking up tomorrow with a mind free from the weight of inherited beliefs, programmed fears and unconscious patterns. Imagine looking in the mirror and seeing not who you've been told you are, but who you truly are beneath it all. Imagine living each day from choice rather than compulsion, from consciousness rather than conditioning, from freedom rather than fear. What would you do with that freedom? Where would you go? Who would you become? What would you create? What would you discover about yourself and the world when the invisible barriers finally fall away? That world isn't a fantasy. That freedom isn't a dream. That person isn't someone else. That possibility lives within you right now, waiting to be awakened, waiting to be remembered, waiting to be set free. Watch them. Just watch them for a moment. Look at the faces around you on any given day. In the grocery store, on the subway, walking down the street, sitting in meetings. What do you see? Really see? You see the walking dead, don't you? People who have given up on their dreams so completely that they've forgotten they ever had any. People who have accepted limitation as law and mediocrity as destiny. They wake up to alarm clocks that jolt them from whatever peace they might have found in sleep, immediately reaching for phones that fill their minds with other people's opinions, other people's problems, other people's manufactured emergencies. Before their feet even hit the floor, they've already surrendered their consciousness to the external world. Before they've taken their first conscious breath, they're already reacting instead of choosing. And then they wonder why they feel powerless. They wonder why their lives feel like they're happening to them rather than being created by them. They wonder why they feel trapped, frustrated, angry, and empty, all while doing exactly what everyone else is doing, following the same patterns, making the same choices, thinking the same thoughts that have led millions before them to the same dead end. This is what happens when you ignore the wisdom that Napoleon Hill and Jung tried to give the world. This is what happens when you refuse to take responsibility for the quality of your own consciousness. This is what happens when you let your mind run on autopilot, when you accept other people's definitions of reality, when you choose comfort over growth and familiarity over freedom. They complain constantly, but they never change anything. They blame circumstances, but they never examine their responses to those circumstances. They feel victimized by life, but they never recognize their role in creating their experience. They want different results, but they keep thinking the same thoughts, feeling the same emotions, and taking the same actions that have always led them exactly where they are. Look at how they handle challenges. The moment something doesn't go according to their limited plan, they collapse into drama, chaos, and emotional reactivity. They've never learned what Jung called holding the tension of opposites, sitting with uncertainty without immediately rushing to escape it through distraction, blame, or resignation. They've never developed what Hill called definiteness of purpose, a clear, unwavering focus that transforms obstacles into opportunities and setbacks into setups for comebacks. Instead, they live in a constant state of low-level panic, rushing from one urgent distraction to another, never pausing long enough to examine whether their thoughts are actually true, whether their beliefs are actually useful, whether their patterns are actually serving them. They've become addicted to busyness, mistaking motion for progress, activity for achievement, reaction for response. And the saddest part? They defend this lifestyle. They've become so identified with their limitations that any suggestion of freedom feels like an attack on their identity. They've invested so much energy in justifying their imprisonment that liberation feels more threatening than captivity. They would rather be right about their limitations than free from them. Let me tell you about Sarah. She was brilliant, the kind of person who could see solutions that others missed, who had ideas that could change everything, who possessed natural leadership abilities that drew people to her like moths to flame. She graduated at the top of her class, started her career with enthusiasm and ambition, and had dreams that sparkled with possibility. But Sarah had never learned to recognize the difference between her authentic thoughts and her conditioned thoughts. She had never developed the skill of conscious observation that Jung considered essential for psychological development. She had never studied what Hill called the principle of autosuggestion, the understanding that you are constantly programming your subconscious mind with either positive or negative thoughts, and that this programming determines your reality. So when the first real challenge came, a project that didn't go as planned, a boss who criticized her approach, a failure that felt more personal than professional, Sarah did what most people do. She internalized it. She made it mean something about her worth, her capabilities, her future. She let that single experience become evidence for a story of limitation that would shape every decision she made for the next 20 years. Instead of seeing the failure as feedback, she saw it as verdict. Instead of treating the criticism as information, she treated it as identity. Instead of using the setback as a setup for a comeback, she used it as proof that her dreams were unrealistic, her ambitions were naive, and her hopes were foolish. And then she did what people do when they've decided they're not capable of extraordinary things. She settled. She took a safe job that required only a fraction of her capabilities. She surrounded herself with people who reinforced her new story of limitation. She began to pride herself on being realistic and looked down on others who still believed in possibilities she had abandoned. Years passed. Sarah became very good at managing her reduced expectations. She became expert at finding reasons why bigger dreams were impractical, why greater success was for other people, why true fulfillment was a luxury she couldn't afford. She built an entire identity around being someone who keeps her feet on the ground and doesn't get carried away by fantasies. But late at night, in the quiet moments when the distractions fell away and the noise stopped, Sarah would feel something stirring in her chest. A longing, a remembering, a whisper of the person she used to be before she decided to be smaller. And instead of listening to that whisper, instead of honoring that stirring, instead of following that remembering back to her authentic self, she would immediately distract herself with television, social media, wine, or worry. She had become a master of self-abandonment, an expert in betraying her own potential, a professional at convincing herself that the life she was living was the life she was meant to live. She had learned to silence the voice of her soul so effectively that she forgot it had ever spoken. By the time she reached 40, Sarah had achieved exactly what she had unconsciously chosen, a life that was perfectly ordinary, completely predictable, and utterly forgettable. She had successfully avoided the risk of great failure by ensuring she would never achieve great success. She had protected herself from disappointment by abandoning her dreams before anyone else could crush them. And when younger people would ask her for advice, she would tell them to be realistic. She would warn them about the dangers of shooting too high and the importance of having backup plans. She had become a missionary for mediocrity, a prophet of limitation, an evangelist for the very prison that had been suffocating her own spirit for decades. This is what happens when you ignore the fundamental truth that both Hill and Jung understood. Your outer world is a reflection of your inner world. Your circumstances are a mirror of your consciousness. Your results are a direct consequence of your relationship with your own mind. And if you don't take responsibility for that relationship, if you don't become conscious of how your thoughts are creating your reality, then your thoughts will create your reality unconsciously, and that unconscious creation is almost always a prison. Sarah's story isn't unique. It's the story of millions of people who had potential they never developed, dreams they never pursued, gifts they never shared, love they never expressed, lives they never lived. It's the story of what happens when you let fear make your decisions, when you let other people's opinions become your reality, when you let temporary setbacks become permanent limitations. But here's what makes Sarah's story even more tragic. None of it was necessary. Every limitation she accepted was optional. Every dream she abandoned was still available. Every capability she buried was still accessible. The prison she lived in was entirely self-constructed and could have been demolished at any moment simply by changing her relationship with her own thoughts. Jung wrote about this phenomenon, how people become so identified with their persona, their social mask, that they forget who they really are underneath. They become so attached to their story of limitation that they mistake it for reality. They become so invested in being right about their restrictions that they're willing to sacrifice their freedom to maintain their position. Hill observed the same pattern in his study of unsuccessful people. They all had one thing in common: They had accepted defeat in their own minds long before they experienced it in their circumstances. They had surrendered their power to choose their thoughts, their responses, their focus, their beliefs. They had become unconscious participants in their own diminishment. And this is exactly what's happening all around you right now. People are choosing limitation over liberation, safety over growth, comfort over consciousness, and then wondering why they feel stuck, frustrated, angry, and empty. They're living from their conditioning instead of their choice, from their patterns instead of their purpose, from their fears instead of their faith. They've forgotten that thoughts are tools, not masters. They've forgotten that beliefs are choices, not facts. They've forgotten that identity is flexible, not fixed. They've forgotten that the future is created by consciousness, not determined by circumstances. Most devastating of all, they've forgotten that freedom is always available. They've forgotten that consciousness is always a choice. They've forgotten that every moment offers the opportunity to begin again, to think differently, to choose differently, to be differently. They live as if their past determines their future, as if their circumstances define their possibilities, as if their limitations are laws rather than choices. They've accepted the idea that they are victims of their thoughts instead of masters of them, subjects of their conditioning instead of creators of their experience. And then they wonder why they feel powerless. They wonder why their lives feel small. They wonder why their dreams feel impossible. They wonder why they feel like prisoners in their own existence. The answer is simple and obvious, but they refuse to see it. They have voluntarily surrendered their power to choose. They have handed over the keys to their consciousness to fear, doubt, conditioning, and limitation. They have become unconscious collaborators in their own imprisonment. But you don't have to be like them. You don't have to follow their path. You don't have to accept their limitations as your reality. You don't have to make their choices your choices. You don't have to repeat their patterns or inherit their restrictions. You can choose differently. You can think differently. You can be differently. You can break the cycle of unconscious living that has trapped so many others. You can refuse to accept limitation as law. You can insist on freedom as your birthright. The question is, will you? Will you choose consciousness over conditioning? Will you choose growth over comfort? Will you choose freedom over safety? Will you choose to think your own thoughts instead of inheriting other people's limitations? And if you decided to make that choice, if you decided to break free from the patterns that have kept you small, the thoughts that have kept you trapped, the beliefs that have kept you limited, what would happen then? What would become possible? Who would you become? What would you create? What would you discover about yourself and the world when you finally refuse to accept imprisonment as normal? What if you decided to make freedom your priority, consciousness your practice, and authentic self-expression your purpose? What if you chose to become living proof that limitation is optional, that conditioning can be overcome, that anyone can break free from the mental prisons that society, family, and personal history have constructed around them? What would your life look like then? What would your days feel like? What would your future hold? And what if you decided to make that choice not someday, not when conditions are perfect, not when you feel ready, but right now, in this moment, as you read these words? What if you decided to stop being like everyone else and start being like yourself? The mechanisms of mental imprisonment and liberation aren't mysteries. They're laws as predictable as gravity and as reliable as mathematics. For over a century, brilliant minds have been mapping the territory of human consciousness, documenting the exact processes by which thoughts become things, beliefs become reality, and mental patterns become life outcomes. What they discovered will change everything about how you understand your own mind. Napoleon Hill spent 20 years studying the most successful people of his era, interviewing titans of industry and masters of achievement, searching for the common denominators that separated those who broke free from limitation from those who remained trapped by it. What he found wasn't talent, luck, or favorable circumstances. What he found was a systematic understanding of how consciousness works, how thoughts combine with emotion to create belief, how belief directs attention, how attention shapes perception, and how perception determines experience. Carl Jung approached the same territory from a different angle, diving deep into the psychological structures that keep people unconscious, reactive, and trapped in repetitive patterns. Through decades of clinical observation and personal exploration, he mapped the hidden dynamics of the psyche, the shadow that contains rejected aspects of self, the persona that masks authentic identity, the complex patterns that run beneath, conscious awareness, and the process of individuation that leads to genuine freedom. What both men understood, along with other pioneers like Viktor Frankl, James Allen, William James, and countless others, is this: your mind operates according to specific laws, and these laws can be understood, applied, and mastered. Freedom isn't a mystical state or a lucky accident. It's the inevitable result of aligning your consciousness with these fundamental principles. The first law is this: whatever you focus on consistently and emotionally, you will experience more of, not because of magic or wishful thinking, but because of how your neural networks function, how your perceptual filters operate, and how your attention shapes your reality. Your mind is constantly scanning your environment for evidence to support your dominant thoughts and beliefs. If you believe you're limited, you'll notice every piece of evidence that confirms that limitation while filtering out contradictory information. If you believe you're capable of extraordinary things, you'll notice opportunities, resources, and possibilities that were always there but invisible to your previous mental programming. Jung called this phenomenon projection, the unconscious process by which internal states create external experiences. When you carry unexamined beliefs about limitation, inadequacy, or impossibility, you project these beliefs onto your circumstances and then experience them as objective reality. You don't see the world as it is. You see the world as you are, filtered through the lens of your conscious and unconscious beliefs. Hill understood the same principle from a more practical angle. He observed that successful people had learned to direct their attention deliberately rather than letting it be controlled by circumstances, other people, or unconscious patterns. They had developed what he called controlled attention, the ability to focus on what they wanted to create rather than what they wanted to avoid, on solutions rather than problems, on possibilities rather than limitations. This is where most people get it backwards. They focus on what they don't want and wonder why they get more of it. They think about their problems all day and wonder why their problems grow. They rehearse their limitations constantly and wonder why they feel so restricted. They feed their fears with attention and wonder why they feel so afraid. The second law follows logically from the first. If focusing on limitation creates more limitation, then focusing on expansion creates more expansion. If thinking thoughts of inadequacy makes you feel and act inadequate, then thinking thoughts of capability makes you feel and act capable. If believing you're trapped makes you perceive traps everywhere, then believing you're free makes you perceive opportunities everywhere. But here's where it gets deeper. Jung discovered that most of what people consider their thoughts aren't actually personal at all. They're inherited from family, culture, society, and what he called the collective unconscious. You're walking around with other people's beliefs about what's possible, other people's fears about what's dangerous, other people's limitations about what's realistic. You've internalized voices that aren't your own and mistaken them for wisdom. Think of your mind as a river. For most people, this river is polluted with debris that doesn't belong to them. Societal conditioning about what they should want, family programming about what they should fear, cultural messages about what they should believe. The water can't flow freely because it's clogged with inherited limitations, borrowed beliefs, and second-hand fears. But when you learn to distinguish between your authentic thoughts and your conditioned thoughts, when you develop what Jung called discrimination and Hill called accurate thinking, you can begin to clear the river. You can remove the debris that doesn't belong to you. You can restore the natural flow of consciousness that is your birthright. Viktor Frankl, who discovered meaning and purpose in the darkest circumstances imaginable, understood this at the deepest level. He observed that between any stimulus and response there exists a space, and in that space lies your freedom to choose. Most people live reactively, unconsciously, automatically. They let circumstances determine their thoughts determine their emotions determine their actions, and their actions determine their results. They've given up their power to choose at the very first step. But when you learn to expand that space between stimulus and response, when you develop the capacity to pause before reacting, when you reclaim your power to choose your thoughts regardless of your circumstances, you break the chain of unconscious cause and effect that has been running your life. You step out of the river of conditioning and onto the bank of consciousness. You become a creator of experience rather than a victim of it. James Allen captured this principle perfectly when he wrote that you are literally what you think, your character being the complete sum of all your thoughts, not your circumstances, not your history, not your genetics, not your social position, your thoughts. And since thoughts can be chosen, character can be developed. Since character determines destiny, destiny can be created. But most people approach this backwards. They think they need to change their circumstances in order to change their thoughts. They believe they'll feel confident when they achieve success. They'll feel abundant when they have money. They'll feel lovable when they find love. They're waiting for external changes to give them internal freedom. The masters understand the opposite is true. Internal changes create external changes. When you change your relationship with your own mind, your mind changes your relationship with the world. When you learn to think thoughts of capability, you develop capabilities. When you consistently feel emotions of abundance, you create abundance. When you embody the consciousness of freedom, you experience freedom in your circumstances. This is why affirmations alone don't work for most people. They're trying to think new thoughts on top of old beliefs without addressing the underlying programming. It's like trying to plant flowers in soil that's been poisoned. The new thoughts can't take root because the mental environment hasn't been prepared to receive them. Jung understood that real transformation requires what he called shadow work, bringing unconscious patterns into conscious awareness so they can be examined, understood, and transformed. You can't change what you can't see. You can't transform what you won't acknowledge. You can't transcend what you refuse to face. Most people are running on autopilot, driven by unconscious patterns that were installed in childhood and reinforced by repetition. They're living from their conditioning instead of their consciousness, from their programming instead of their purpose, from their past instead of their potential. They've never learned to observe their own thinking process, to question their own beliefs, to examine their own assumptions. But when you develop what Jung called self-observation and what Hill called self-analysis, you begin to see the patterns that have been running your life from the shadows. You begin to recognize the difference between thoughts that serve you and thoughts that enslave you. You begin to understand how your own mind has been working for you or against you. This observation itself is transformative. When you truly see a limiting pattern, when you fully understand how it operates and what it costs you, it begins to lose its power over you. Consciousness is like light. When you shine it on unconscious patterns, they can't operate in the shadows anymore. They either transform or dissolve. The third law emerges from this understanding. What you make conscious, you can change. What remains unconscious changes you. Most people are being changed by patterns they can't see, driven by forces they don't understand, limited by beliefs they've never examined. They're unconscious prisoners in their own mental jail. But when you learn to make the unconscious conscious, when you develop the skill of watching your own mind in action, when you become aware of the thoughts you're thinking and the beliefs you're believing, you reclaim your power to choose. You step out of the role of victim and into the role of creator. You transform from someone who has thoughts to someone who chooses thoughts. Epictetus, the ancient Stoic philosopher, understood this principle 20 centuries ago when he taught that you are not disturbed by events, but by your views of events. Change your view, change your experience, change your thinking, change your life, change your consciousness, change your destiny. But here's where most people get stuck. They try to change their thinking without changing their identity. They try to adopt new beliefs while maintaining old self-concepts. They try to think like a successful person while still identifying as a failure. This creates internal conflict and inconsistency that sabotages their efforts. Jung called this the transcendent function, the process by which opposing elements within the psyche are held in tension until a new level of consciousness emerges that includes and transcends both. You can't just layer new thoughts on top of old identity. You have to undergo what he called psychological transformation, a fundamental shift in how you see yourself and your relationship to reality. Hill observed the same phenomenon in successful individuals. They hadn't just learned to think differently, they had become different people. They had transformed their self-concept to match their aspirations. They had aligned their identity with their intentions. They had become internally what they wanted to become externally. This is the difference between surface change and deep change, between temporary improvement and lasting transformation, between trying to be different and actually being different. When you change at the level of identity, when you shift your fundamental self-concept, when you transform who you believe yourself to be, everything else follows naturally. Think of it like this. If you see yourself as someone who is naturally creative, you'll notice opportunities for creative expression everywhere. If you see yourself as someone who is inherently valuable, you'll attract relationships and situations that reflect that value. If you see yourself as someone who is fundamentally free, you'll find ways to express that freedom, regardless of your circumstances. But if you see yourself as someone who is limited, inadequate, or trapped, you'll unconsciously create experiences that confirm that identity. Your external world will mirror your internal world with mathematical precision. Your circumstances will reflect your consciousness. Your results will match your identity. This is why all lasting change begins with changing how you see yourself. This is why real freedom starts with freeing your mind from limited self-concepts. This is why true transformation requires transforming your relationship with your own identity. And this is where the real work begins. Not in changing your circumstances, but in changing your consciousness. Not in trying to fix your problems, but in transforming your identity. Not in attempting to control your external world, but in mastering your internal world. Because when you master your mind, when you align your consciousness with the principles of freedom rather than the patterns of limitation, when you transform your identity from prisoner to creator, something magical happens. Your external world begins to reorganize itself to match your internal transformation. Opportunities appear that weren't there before. Resources show up that you didn't expect. Possibilities open that seemed impossible. People respond to you differently. Circumstances shift in your favor. Not because you're forcing change, but because you've become a different person. And different people create different realities. This isn't theory. This isn't philosophy. This isn't speculation. This is how consciousness works. This is how minds create realities. This is how transformation happens. And once you understand these principles, once you align with these laws, once you begin to apply this knowledge systematically and consistently, your life will never be the same. The question isn't whether these principles work. They work automatically, whether you understand them or not. The question is whether you'll use them consciously or unconsciously, deliberately or accidentally, in service of freedom or in service of limitation. What will you choose? Now comes the moment of truth. You understand the principles, you see the patterns, you recognize the prison. But understanding without application is just intellectual entertainment. Knowledge without action is just another form of limitation. The time for philosophy has passed. The time for practice has arrived. Freedom isn't a concept to be contemplated. It's a skill to be developed. Liberation isn't a theory to be understood. It's a discipline to be practiced. And like any skill, like any discipline, it requires specific actions taken consistently over time. It requires you to stop thinking like a prisoner and start acting like a free person. One choice at a time, one moment at a time, one day at a time. Here are the 5 non-negotiable practices that will transform your relationship with your own mind and, consequently, your relationship with reality itself. These aren't suggestions or recommendations. They're requirements for anyone serious about breaking free from mental limitation and stepping into authentic power. Practice the daily mental audit. Every evening, without exception, conduct a thorough examination of your mental activity from that day. Sit in silence for 10 minutes and review the thoughts you entertained, the emotions you experienced, the reactions you had, and the choices you made. But don't just review, analyze. Ask yourself, Which thoughts served me and which thoughts enslaved me? Which emotions empowered me and which emotions weakened me? Which reactions moved me toward freedom and which reactions moved me toward limitation? This isn't about judgment or self-criticism. This is about developing what Jung called objective self-observation, the ability to witness your own psychological processes without being swept away by them. Most people live in complete unconsciousness about their own mental activity. They think thousands of thoughts each day, but never examine the quality, direction, or consequences of those thoughts. They're like drivers speeding down a highway with their eyes closed, wondering why they keep crashing. When someone criticizes you, what's your automatic response? Do you immediately defend, attack, or collapse into self-doubt? Or do you pause, breathe, and choose your response consciously? When faced with a challenge, do you automatically think, this is too hard, or I can't handle this? Or, why does this always happen to me? Or do you automatically think, how can I grow from this? Or, what opportunity is hidden in this? Or, how can I use this to become stronger? During your daily audit, you'll begin to notice patterns. You'll see how certain types of situations trigger automatic reactions. You'll observe how specific thoughts lead to predictable emotions. You'll recognize how unconscious beliefs shape your perceptions. And once you see these patterns clearly, you can begin to change them consciously. Write down what you discover. Document the thoughts that weakened you and the thoughts that strengthened you. Track the situations that triggered unconscious reactions and the situations where you responded consciously. Notice which environments, people, and activities support your highest thinking and which ones pull you down into limitation. This practice alone will transform your life because it develops the foundational skill of conscious awareness. You can't change what you can't see. You can't transform what you won't acknowledge. But when you begin to observe your own mind in action, when you develop the capacity to witness your thoughts without being controlled by them, you reclaim your power to choose. Master the interruption technique. Throughout each day, catch yourself in the act of unconscious thinking and deliberately interrupt the pattern. The moment you notice yourself rehearsing old limitations, replaying past failures, or imagining future disasters, stop immediately. Don't analyze why you're thinking those thoughts. Don't judge yourself for having them. Don't try to understand where they came from. Simply interrupt the pattern and redirect your attention. Say stop out loud if necessary. Physically move your body, change your physiology, stand up, stretch, walk around, or do jumping jacks. Your thoughts are connected to your physical state, and changing your body can instantly change your mental state. Use this connection deliberately, then immediately replace the limiting thought with an empowering question. Instead of, why does this always happen to me? Ask, how is this situation serving my growth? Instead of, I can't handle this, ask, what strength am I developing by handling this? Instead of, this is too hard, ask, what skills am I building by overcoming this challenge? Questions direct your mind's attention and search function. When you ask disempowering questions, your mind finds disempowering answers. When you ask empowering questions, your mind finds empowering answers. This isn't positive thinking. This is practical neuroscience. You're literally rewiring your neural pathways by changing the quality of your questions. Practice this interruption technique with micro thoughts throughout the day. When you catch yourself thinking, I'm not smart enough, interrupt and ask, how am I developing intelligence right now? When you notice I don't have enough time, interrupt and ask, how can I use this time most effectively? When you observe this person annoys me, interrupt and ask, what is this person teaching me about myself? At first, you'll catch yourself after thinking limiting thoughts for several minutes. Then you'll catch yourself after a few seconds. Eventually, you'll catch yourself before the limiting thoughts fully form. You'll develop what Hill called mental vigilance, the ability to guard the door of your mind and only allow entry to thoughts that serve your freedom rather than reinforce your limitations. Implement morning mental programming the first 30 minutes after you wake up are the most neurologically influential period of your entire day. Your brain is transitioning from the theta state of sleep to the alpha and beta states of waking consciousness. During this transition, your subconscious mind is most receptive to new programming. Whatever you feed your mind during this critical window will influence your thoughts, emotions, and actions for the entire day. Most people waste this precious time by immediately checking their phones, consuming other people's thoughts through social media, news, or email, and allowing their minds to be hijacked by external stimuli before they've even chosen their internal state. They surrender their consciousness to other people's agendas within minutes of waking up. They program their minds with fear, anxiety, comparison, and distraction before they've even decided who they want to be that day. Instead, protect this time fiercely. Keep your phone in another room. Create a sacred morning routine that programs your mind for freedom rather than limitation. Spend the first 30 minutes feeding your consciousness with empowering thoughts, inspiring ideas, and clear intentions. Read something that expands your thinking, passages from books by people who have achieved the kind of freedom you're seeking. Listen to audio content that reinforces principles of success, growth, and possibility. But don't just consume passively. Engage actively. Take notes. Ask questions. Apply what you're learning to your specific situation. Then spend 10 minutes in what Hill called self-suggestion. Sit quietly and deliberately think thoughts that align with who you're becoming rather than who you've been. If you're transforming your identity from someone who feels trapped to someone who feels free, think thoughts of freedom. If you're shifting from someone who feels inadequate to someone who feels capable, think thoughts of capability. Don't just think these thoughts, feel them. Emotion is the fuel that powers thought into reality. When you think thoughts of capability while feeling emotions of confidence, you're programming your subconscious mind to seek and create experiences that match that internal state. When you think thoughts of freedom while feeling emotions of liberation, you're setting up neural pathways that will guide your decisions throughout the day. Visualize yourself moving through your day as the person you're becoming. See yourself handling challenges with calm confidence. Imagine yourself making decisions from consciousness rather than conditioning. Envision yourself responding to difficulties with curiosity rather than reactivity. Feel what it feels like to live from your authentic power rather than your inherited limitations. End your morning programming with clear intentions for the day. Not just what you want to accomplish externally, but who you want to be internally. Not just what you want to do, but how you want to feel. Not just what you want to achieve, but how you want to respond to whatever arises. This morning practice creates momentum that carries you through the entire day. Instead of starting each day unconsciously and reactively, you begin consciously and proactively. Instead of letting circumstances determine your mental state, you establish your mental state before encountering circumstances. Instead of hoping for a good day, you create the internal conditions that make a good day inevitable. Develop conscious response training throughout each day. Deliberately practice responding to situations rather than reacting to them. Every interaction, every challenge, every unexpected event becomes an opportunity to strengthen your ability to choose your response rather than being controlled by unconscious patterns. When someone cuts you off in traffic, instead of automatically reacting with anger or frustration, pause and consciously choose your response. You might choose understanding, maybe they're dealing with an emergency, curiosity, what can this teach me about my own triggers, or simple neutrality, this has nothing to do with me personally. When you receive criticism, instead of immediately defending, attacking, or collapsing, pause and ask, is there truth in this feedback that can help me grow? If yes, extract the value and ignore the delivery. If no, let it pass through you without resistance or attachment. Don't take on other people's opinions as your reality unless they serve your evolution. When faced with a setback or disappointment, instead of automatically thinking, this shouldn't have happened or this ruins everything, pause and ask, how is this serving my development? Every challenge contains a gift. Increased resilience, new skills, deeper wisdom, stronger character. But you can only receive these gifts when you respond consciously rather than react unconsciously. When dealing with difficult people, instead of trying to change them or becoming frustrated with their behavior, pause and ask, what is this person reflecting back to me about myself? Often, the people who trigger us most are showing us aspects of our own shadow that we haven't acknowledged or integrated. Use these interactions as mirrors for self-discovery rather than sources of irritation. When you feel overwhelmed by your circumstances, instead of thinking, "I can't handle this" or "this is too much," pause and ask, "What would someone who is completely free do in this situation?" Then do that. Act as if you're already the person you're becoming. Embody the consciousness you're developing. Make decisions from your future self rather than your past conditioning. Practice this conscious response training in small situations. First, how you handle minor inconveniences reveals how you'll handle major challenges. How you respond to small stresses indicates how you'll respond to large stresses. Build your response muscle with daily training, so it's strong when you need it most. Establish evening mental preparation. Before you sleep, spend 15 minutes preparing your mind for regeneration and growth. Your subconscious mind continues, processing information while you sleep, working on problems, integrating experiences, and forming new neural pathways. What you feed your mind before sleep significantly influences this unconscious processing. Instead of falling asleep to television, news, or social media, which programs your subconscious with other people's problems, fears, and agendas, use this time to program your mind with your own intentions, aspirations, and questions. Review your day for evidence of growth. What did you learn? How did you develop? What strength did you discover? What fear did you overcome? What pattern did you interrupt? What choice did you make consciously rather than automatically? Focus on progress, no matter how small. Your mind grows what you feed attention to. Then, set clear intentions for your unconscious mind to work on while you sleep. Give it specific problems to solve, specific questions to answer, specific goals to move toward. Your subconscious mind is incredibly powerful, but it needs clear direction. Instead of letting it process random worries and anxieties, give it purposeful work to do. Ask questions like, how can I handle tomorrow's challenges with even more consciousness? What opportunities am I not seeing? How can I express my authentic self more fully? What patterns are ready to be transformed? Then release these questions to your unconscious mind and trust it to work on them while you sleep. End your day with gratitude. Not the superficial kind, but deep appreciation for your capacity to grow, to change, to choose, to become. Gratitude for the very fact that you have a mind capable of transformation. Gratitude for the opportunity to break free from limitation. Gratitude for the possibility of creating a life of authentic freedom and expression. This evening practice ensures that your sleep serves your growth rather than reinforcing your limitations. Instead of processing the day's stress and programming tomorrow's anxiety, your mind processes the day's lessons and programs tomorrow's possibilities. These 5 practices aren't optional extras or nice-to-have additions to your routine. They're fundamental requirements for anyone serious about transforming their relationship with their own mind. They're the difference between hoping for change and creating change, between wanting freedom and achieving freedom, between dreaming of transformation and living transformation. Start today. Start with one practice. Start imperfectly, but start. Because every day you delay is another day you remain trapped by unconscious patterns. Every day you postpone is another day your mind runs on autopilot. Every day you wait for perfect conditions is another day you choose limitation over liberation. Your mind is your most powerful tool, but only when you learn to use it consciously. Your thoughts are your greatest resource, but only when you choose them deliberately. Your consciousness is your ultimate freedom, but only when you develop it systematically. The choice is yours. The time is now. The power is within you. What will you do with it? There comes a moment in every transformation when the practices become more than techniques, when the principles become more than concepts, when the journey becomes more than process. There comes a moment when you stop trying to become free and start being free. When you stop working toward consciousness and start living from consciousness. When you stop pursuing your authentic self and start expressing your authentic self. This moment doesn't announce itself with fanfare or ceremony. It arrives quietly, like dawn breaking over a landscape that has been shrouded in darkness for too long. One day you wake up and realize that the person looking back at you in the mirror is no longer the person who began this journey. One day you notice that your thoughts have become allies instead of enemies. One day you discover that your mind has become a garden instead of a battlefield. But this transformation doesn't happen by accident, and it doesn't happen overnight. It happens because you've been cultivating something deeper than new habits or better thoughts. You've been cultivating a new identity. You've been becoming someone entirely different at the level of your core being. And that difference shows up in everything. How you walk through the world, how you respond to challenges, how you relate to others, how you make decisions, how you hold yourself in both triumph and difficulty. The river that knows its course, imagine, a river that has been blocked by debris for decades. Fallen trees, accumulated sediment, and human-made barriers have forced it to flow in directions that feel unnatural, creating stagnant pools where the water grows murky and lifeless. The river remembers its original course, the path carved by ancient wisdom, the direction that honors its deepest nature. But it has adapted to flowing around obstacles, settling for whatever passage it can find. You are that river, and the practices you've been implementing, the consciousness you've been developing, the patterns you've been interrupting. All of this has been clearing the debris that has diverted you from your natural course. Every limiting belief you've questioned has removed another fallen tree. Every unconscious pattern you've brought into awareness has dissolved another barrier. Every moment you've chosen consciousness over conditioning has cleared another section of the channel. But now, something remarkable begins to happen. As the debris clears and the barriers dissolve, the river begins to remember its original power. Water that has been trapped in stagnant pools starts to flow again. Current that has been weakened by obstruction begins to gather strength. And the river doesn't have to think about which direction to flow. It knows. It follows the course that was carved into the landscape of its being long before the obstacles appeared. This is what happens when you clear the conditioning that has been blocking your authentic nature. You don't have to force yourself to be different. You don't have to strain to become something you're not. You simply remove what doesn't belong to you and allow what has always been true to express itself naturally. When criticism comes your way, you don't react from old wounds or defensive patterns. You respond from the clarity of someone who knows their own worth isn't determined by other people's opinions. The response flows naturally, like water following its course, because you're no longer blocked by the debris of insecurity and self-doubt. When challenges arise, you don't collapse into overwhelm or anxiety. You meet them with the steady power of someone who has learned to trust their own capacity to navigate whatever comes. The confidence flows naturally, like water moving around rocks, because you're no longer obstructed by the fallen trees of limiting beliefs about what you can handle. When opportunities appear, you don't hesitate from fear or shrink from self-worth. Issues, you move toward them with the natural momentum of someone who knows they belong in the fullness of life. The action flows naturally, like water moving toward the ocean, because you're no longer dammed up by the sediment of old stories about what you deserve. You become like that river that has remembered its course, powerful not because you're forcing anything, but because you're no longer fighting against your own nature. Clear not because you've eliminated all challenges, but because you've removed the internal obstacles that used to cloud your vision. Flowing not because circumstances are perfect, but because you've learned to move with grace through whatever landscape you encounter, the lighthouse that stands alone. In the midst of storms that would topple lesser structures, there stands a lighthouse, solitary, steadfast, unwavering. It doesn't fight the storm or try to control the weather. It doesn't bend with every wind or sway with every wave. It simply stands in its truth, offering light to anyone who needs guidance, regardless of the chaos surrounding it. This lighthouse wasn't built in calm weather. It was constructed specifically to withstand the fiercest storms, designed to provide stability when everything else is in motion, engineered to shine brightest when the darkness is deepest. Its foundation reaches deep into the bedrock of the earth, anchored to something more solid than the shifting sands of circumstances, more reliable than the changing tides of emotion, more permanent than the passing storms of temporary challenges. You are becoming this lighthouse, not the kind of person who only shines when conditions are favorable, but the kind who radiates steadiness regardless of what's happening around you. Not someone who depends on external circumstances for internal peace, but someone who generates peace from within and shares it with the world. Not a person who looks to others for validation and direction, but someone who has become their own source of guidance and strength. When people around you are caught up in drama, chaos, and emotional reactivity, you remain centered in your own truth. Not because you're cold or disconnected, but because you've learned to distinguish between other people's storms and your own inner weather. You can offer compassion without taking on their turbulence. You can provide support without losing your stability. You can care deeply without being swept away by the intensity of their experience. When society tries to pressure you into conformity, when culture attempts to shrink you down to fit into acceptable boxes, when groups demand that you sacrifice your authenticity for their approval, you stand firm in who you truly are, not with rigidity or defensiveness, but with the quiet confidence of someone who has done the deep work of knowing themselves. Like the lighthouse that doesn't argue with the storm, but simply continues to shine. You don't need to justify your choices or defend your path. Your very being becomes an example of what's possible when someone commits to living from their truth. When challenges crash against you like waves against the shore, you don't crumble or collapse. You've built your identity on the bedrock of self-knowledge, anchored your worth to something deeper than achievement or approval, grounded your security in your own capacity to navigate whatever comes. The storms may be intense, but they're temporary. Your foundation is permanent, and just like that lighthouse, you begin to serve a purpose larger than your own survival. Your steadiness becomes a beacon for others who are lost in their own storms. Your clarity becomes a guide for those who are confused by the chaos of their circumstances. Your peace becomes a reminder to others that calm is possible even in turbulent times. You don't do this by preaching or teaching or trying to fix anyone. You do it simply by being who you have become. Your very presence becomes a demonstration that another way of living is possible. Your response to challenges becomes proof that consciousness can triumph over conditioning. Your embodiment of freedom becomes inspiration for others to begin their own journey of liberation. The lighthouse doesn't chase after ships to offer its light. It doesn't worry about whether anyone will see its beacon. It doesn't dim itself when others complain that its brightness is too intense. It simply stands in its purpose and shines its light, trusting that those who need guidance will find their way to it. The master sculptor revealed, in a workshop filled with blocks of marble, there works a sculptor who has spent years developing their craft. In the beginning, they struggled with the tools, fought against the stone, and became frustrated when their vision didn't immediately manifest in the material. The early sculptures were rough, imperfect, marked by the evidence of inexperience, and the resistance that comes from not yet understanding the relationship between artist, tool, and medium. But with each piece, something shifted. The sculptor began to understand that the art wasn't in forcing the stone to become something it wasn't, but in discovering what was already hidden within it and carefully removing everything that wasn't essential. They learned to work with the natural grain of the marble rather than against it. They developed the patience to make thousands of small, precise cuts rather than trying to achieve the final form with a few dramatic strokes. Now, after years of practice, something remarkable has happened. The sculptor no longer struggles with the tools. The chisel has become an extension of their hand, the hammer an extension of their intention. They no longer fight the stone. They collaborate with it, sensing its possibilities, respecting its nature, finding the form that wants to emerge from within it. They no longer become frustrated with the process. They've learned to trust that each cut, each refinement, each careful removal of excess material is leading them closer to the truth. Hidden within the marble, you have become this master sculptor, and your life is your masterpiece. The tools you've developed, conscious awareness, deliberate response, mental discipline, emotional mastery, are no longer foreign instruments you're trying to learn how to use. They've become natural extensions of your being, as familiar and reliable as your own hands. The raw material of your circumstances is no longer something you fight against or try to force into submission. You've learned to work with the natural grain of your reality, sensing the possibilities hidden within every situation, finding the opportunities concealed within every challenge, discovering the gifts wrapped inside every difficulty. The process of continuous growth and refinement is no longer a source of frustration or impatience. You've developed the understanding that transformation happens through countless small choices rather than dramatic overnight changes. You've cultivated the patience to make precise adjustments rather than expecting immediate perfection. You've learned to trust that every moment of conscious choice, every interruption of unconscious pattern, every deliberate response instead of automatic reaction is moving you closer to the authentic masterpiece of who you truly are. When people see you now, they see someone who has learned to live as an artist of their own existence. They witness someone who approaches their life with the same intentionality, creativity, and mastery that a sculptor brings to their work. They observe someone who has transformed the raw material of ordinary human experience into something extraordinary through the application of skill, patience, and vision. But here's what makes you different from those who are still struggling with their tools and fighting against their stone. You understand that the masterpiece was always there, hidden within. The marble of your being waiting to be revealed. You weren't creating something from nothing. You were discovering something that had always been true. You weren't becoming someone different. You were becoming who you had always been beneath the layers of conditioning, limitation, and false identity. Every limiting belief you've chiseled away has revealed more of your authentic power. Every unconscious pattern you've removed has exposed more of your natural wisdom. Every moment of conditioning you've dissolved has uncovered more of your inherent freedom. You haven't been building a new self. You've been excavating your true self, and now, like the master sculptor standing before their completed work, you look at your life and recognize the beauty of what has been revealed. Not perfect. Perfection was never the goal, but authentic, true, aligned with the deepest nature of who you are and what you came here to express. This is who you are becoming, someone who has learned to live as both the sculptor and the sculpture, the artist and the artwork, the creator and the creation. Someone who understands that life isn't something that happens to you, it's something you shape consciously, carefully, lovingly, into an expression of your deepest truth. The river knows its course. The lighthouse stands in its purpose. The sculptor reveals the masterpiece. And you embody all three. You flow with the power of someone who has cleared the obstacles to their authentic nature. You shine with the steadiness of someone who has anchored their identity in truth rather than circumstance. You create with the skill of someone who has learned to transform the raw material of human experience into something magnificent. This is not who you're trying to become. This is who you are becoming. This is not a distant goal or future possibility. This is the reality that emerges when you consistently choose consciousness over conditioning, when you persistently choose growth over comfort, when you repeatedly choose freedom over the familiar limitations that once felt like safety. And the most beautiful part? This is just the beginning. This is not the end of your transformation. It's the foundation for everything that comes next. Because when you become someone who flows like a river, shines like a lighthouse, and creates like a master sculptor, you discover that there are no limits to what you can become, create, and contribute to the world. The question is no longer whether you can change. The question is, what will you do with the magnificent freedom you've discovered? In the deepest chambers of mastery lies a secret that the truly free have discovered, but rarely speak about directly. It's not found in action, but in stillness. Not in speaking, but in silence. Not in grasping, but in releasing. Not in demanding, but in allowing. This is the final frontier of consciousness, the realm where you transcend the need to control outcomes and instead learn to influence reality through the quality of your being itself. Most people live in a constant state of mental noise, thoughts tumbling over thoughts, emotions reacting to emotions, the internal dialogue never ceasing, never resting, never finding the profound peace that exists in the spaces between thoughts. They've become addicted to mental activity, mistaking busy minds for productive minds. confusing mental chaos for mental power. They've forgotten that the most profound insights arise not from thinking harder, but from thinking less. They've lost touch with the transformative force that lives in silence. But you who have walked this path of consciousness, who have practiced these disciplines, who have transformed your relationship with your own mind, you are ready to discover the ultimate source of power that lies beyond thought, beyond emotion, beyond the endless chatter of conditioned consciousness. You are ready to learn the art of strategic silence. The power of the pause. Watch a master chess player in the moments before they make their winning move. Notice the quality of their stillness. See how they sit back from the board, not frantically calculating every possibility, but allowing the perfect move to reveal itself from the quiet clarity of focused awareness. They understand something that amateurs never learn. The most powerful action emerges from the deepest stillness. This is what you must learn to cultivate in every interaction, every challenge, every moment when life demands a response from you. Instead of reacting immediately from the conditioned patterns that have run your life for years, you pause. Instead of speaking the first words that come to mind, you create space for wisdom to emerge. Instead of moving from anxiety, fear, or the desperate need to control, you act from the centered calm that knows exactly what is needed. When someone attacks you with criticism, instead of immediately defending or counterattacking, you pause. In that pause, you feel your own groundedness. You reconnect with your own truth. You remember that their words say more about their internal state than about your reality. And from that remembering, your response, if any response is needed at all, comes from power rather than reactivity, from clarity rather than confusion, from love rather than fear. When faced with a decision that could change the trajectory of your life, instead of rushing to choose based on anxiety, social pressure, or the need to appear decisive, you pause. In that pause, you connect with your deeper knowing. You feel into what truly aligns with your authentic path. You sense which choice comes from your highest self rather than your conditioned self, and the decision that emerges carries the weight of truth rather than the weakness of impulsivity. When opportunities arise that trigger your old patterns of scarcity, inadequacy, or unworthiness, instead of immediately grasping or rejecting based on fear, you pause. In that pause, you remember who you have become. You connect with the abundance that flows from your transformed consciousness. You choose from fullness rather than emptiness, from confidence rather than insecurity, from the knowledge that you deserve everything that aligns with your highest good. This pause is not hesitation, it's precision, it's not indecision, it's discernment. It's not weakness. It's the ultimate strength of someone who has learned to respond from their center rather than react from their conditioning. In a world of people who speak without thinking, act without reflecting, and choose without connecting to their deeper truth, your ability to pause becomes a superpower. But the pause is more than just a tactical advantage in navigating life's challenges. It's a doorway into a different dimension of consciousness altogether, the realm where you begin to sense the subtle currents that move beneath the surface of ordinary experience, where you start to feel the invisible connections that link all things, where you discover that influence happens as much through presence as through action. The art of detachment. Here lies perhaps the most misunderstood principle of conscious living, the practice of detachment from outcomes. This isn't indifference or apathy. This isn't giving up on your dreams or lowering your standards. This isn't resignation to mediocrity or acceptance of limitation. True detachment is the ultimate expression of confidence, the unshakable knowing that you are complete regardless of what happens, that your worth isn't determined by your achievements, that your happiness doesn't depend on external circumstances aligning with your preferences. When you operate from attachment, you live in a constant state of tension between how things are and how you think they should be. You suffer when reality doesn't match your expectations. You become desperate in your efforts to control outcomes. You make decisions from fear of loss rather than excitement about possibility. You relate to other people as objects to be manipulated for your desired results rather than souls to be honored in their own journey. But when you master the art of detachment, something miraculous happens. You begin to influence reality from a completely different level. Instead of trying to force outcomes through willpower, manipulation, or desperate effort, you create conditions for success through the quality of your consciousness. Instead of pushing against resistance, you flow around obstacles. Instead of demanding that life conform to your timeline, you align with the deeper intelligence that orchestrates perfect timing. This doesn't mean you stop having preferences or pursuing goals. It means you hold your preferences lightly and pursue your goals joyfully rather than desperately. You give your best effort and then trust the process. You plant seeds and then allow them to grow in their own season. You show up fully and then release attachment to specific results. When you approach a job interview, you prepare thoroughly, present authentically, and then detach from whether you get the position. Your confidence comes not from needing that particular job, but from knowing that you have valuable contributions to make somewhere. When you don't get it, you don't collapse into self-doubt. When you do get it, you don't inflate with ego. You simply move to the next appropriate step in your journey. When you enter relationships, you love fully without trying to control or change the other person. You give generously without keeping score. You remain open without becoming possessive. You commit deeply while holding space for growth and change. Your security comes not from the other person's behavior, but from your own capacity to love and be loved. When you pursue creative projects, you express your vision completely without attachment to how it's received. You create from authentic inspiration rather than calculated appeal. You share your gifts without demanding specific responses. Your fulfillment comes from the act of creation itself rather than from external validation. This level of detachment requires enormous trust. Trust in your own resilience, trust in the intelligence of life, trust in the process of growth and evolution. But this trust isn't blind faith. It's earned confidence, developed through years of observing how consciousness works, how growth happens, how life responds to different qualities of energy and intention. The discipline of daily transcendence. Freedom isn't a destination you arrive at once and then remain in forever. Freedom is a practice you choose each day, each moment, each time you're faced with the opportunity to respond consciously rather than react unconsciously. And this practice requires what can only be called sacred discipline, not the grinding, joyless discipline of forcing yourself to do things you hate, but the loving discipline of consistently choosing what serves your highest evolution. Each morning, before the world demands your attention, before others' needs crowd your awareness, before the day's responsibilities eclipse your inner connection, you create sacred time for communion with your deepest self. This isn't optional. This isn't something you do when you feel like it or when you have extra time. This is as essential as breathing, as fundamental as eating, as necessary as sleeping. In this sacred time, you practice the discipline of gratitude, not the superficial, reciting of things you're supposed to be thankful for, but the profound recognition of the miracle of your existence, the gift of your consciousness, the extraordinary opportunity to participate in the grand experiment of being human. You feel gratitude for your capacity to grow, to change, to choose, to become. You appreciate the very fact that you have a mind capable of transformation, a heart capable of love, a spirit capable of transcendence. You practice the discipline of meditation, not as an escape from reality, but as a way of connecting more deeply with what's real. You sit in stillness and observe the movements of your own consciousness. You watch thoughts arise and pass away without being swept away by them. You feel emotions emerge and dissolve without being controlled by them. You rest in the awareness that witnesses all experiences, but is unchanged by any of them. In this practice, you discover something extraordinary. You are not your thoughts, you are not your emotions, you are not your circumstances, you are not your history, you are not your future plans. You are the consciousness that observes all of these things. You are the awareness that remains constant while everything else changes. You are the space in which all experiences arise and pass away. This realization changes everything. When you know yourself as consciousness rather than content, as awareness rather than experience, as the observer rather than the observed, you can never again be trapped by temporary states or limited by changing circumstances. You have found your ultimate freedom, the freedom of your essential nature. But this inner work must be balanced with outer expression. The insights you gain in meditation must be embodied in your daily interactions. The peace you cultivate in stillness must be maintained in activity. The love you discover in silence must be shared through your presence and actions. Throughout each day, you practice the discipline of conscious response. You catch yourself before reacting unconsciously. You pause before speaking carelessly. You choose your words to heal rather than harm, to build rather than destroy, to inspire rather than diminish. You move through the world as someone who understands the power of consciousness and uses that power responsibly. You practice the discipline of service, not the martyred service that comes from obligation or guilt, but the joyful service that flows naturally from someone who has discovered their connection to all life. You look for opportunities to contribute, to support, to uplift. You use your growing freedom not just for personal benefit, but for the benefit of everyone whose life you touch. In the evening, you practice the discipline of reflection and renewal. You review the day, not with judgment, but with compassion. You acknowledge where you responded consciously and where you reacted unconsciously. You appreciate your growth and accept your humanness. You set intentions for continued evolution, and then rest in the trust that consciousness is always moving toward greater freedom, greater love, greater truth, the integration of everything now. You can see the full arc of the journey you've taken. You began by recognizing the invisible prison of inherited limitations, conditioned thoughts, and unconscious patterns. You learned to distinguish between your authentic nature and your programmed responses. You developed the tools and practices necessary to transform your relationship with your own mind. You embodied the identity of someone who chooses consciousness over conditioning, and now you've discovered the ultimate freedom that lies beyond even the need to choose. The natural state of someone who has aligned their individual consciousness with the greater intelligence that moves through all life. This is what Napoleon Hill glimpsed when he wrote about the power of thought to create reality. This is what Jung understood when he described the process of individuation. This is what every wisdom tradition has pointed toward when speaking of liberation, enlightenment, awakening, self-realization. This is the freedom that exists beyond the personal will, the freedom of surrendering the small self to the guidance of the greater self. You have learned that true power comes not from controlling others, but from mastering yourself. You've discovered that real security comes not from external circumstances, but from internal stability. You found that lasting happiness comes not from getting what you want, but from wanting what you have. You've realized that authentic success comes not from achieving goals, but from becoming the kind of person whose very being is a contribution to the world. And perhaps most importantly, you've understood that freedom is not a selfish pursuit, but a gift to everyone around you. When you live from consciousness rather than conditioning, you give others permission to do the same. When you respond to challenges with calm confidence, you demonstrate that another way of being is possible. When you embody authentic power, you inspire others to discover their own strength. When you shine with the light of your true nature, you illuminate the path for others who are still finding their way out of darkness. This is your responsibility now, not a burden, but a privilege. You who have tasted freedom cannot pretend to be imprisoned. You who have discovered your power cannot pretend to be powerless. You who have learned to choose consciousness cannot unconsciously follow the patterns that lead to limitation and suffering. Every day, every moment, every interaction becomes an opportunity to demonstrate what you've learned, to embody what you've become, to share what you've discovered. Not through preaching or teaching, but simply by being who you are. Not by trying to change others, but by remaining anchored in your own transformation. Not by forcing your insights on those who aren't ready, but by living in such a way that those who are ready can see what's possible. The world needs people who have done this work. The world needs individuals who have broken free from the collective trance of limitation, fear, and unconsciousness. The world needs examples of what human beings can become when they commit to the disciplined practice of consciousness. You are that example. You are that possibility. You are that demonstration of what happens when someone refuses to accept limitation as law, conditioning as identity, or imprisonment as inevitable. When you master the art of strategic silence, the practice of detachment, and the discipline of daily transcendence, nothing and no one can shake you from your center. No criticism can diminish your worth because you know your value comes from consciousness itself. No failure can destroy your confidence because you understand that setbacks are setups for growth. No challenge can overwhelm you because you've learned to meet everything from the inexhaustible resources of your awakened awareness. This is not the end of your journey. It's the beginning of a completely different way of being human. This is not graduation from the School of Consciousness. It's enrollment in the advanced courses. This is not the completion of your transformation. It's the foundation for everything you will create, contribute, and become from this moment forward. The practices continue. The growth continues. The service continues. The joy continues. The freedom continues to deepen, expand, and express itself through every aspect of your life. When you dominate the art of conscious living, when you master the discipline of mental freedom, when you embody the truth of your unlimited nature, nothing and no one can diminish the magnificence of who you have become. You are no longer trapped by thoughts you didn't choose. You are no longer limited by beliefs you didn't examine. You are no longer controlled by patterns you didn't create. You are free to think your own thoughts, feel your own feelings, make your own choices, and live your own truth. This is who you are now. This is what you have become. This is the freedom that no one can take away from you because it exists in the very core of your being. Welcome to your liberated life. Welcome to your conscious existence. Welcome to the full expression of your authentic power.